So, hi everyone, in present and online. Thank you for joining this SSC event about healthy vegan diet. I'm very honored to introduce you Dr. Laura Hackl. She's currently in Vienna, so this is why we decided to do this hybrid event. She studied pharmacy in Vienna and did her PhD in the Health Science and Technology Department here at TTH in the Human Nutrition Group. In her career, she already did a lot of volunteering and worked with different institutes, universities, and companies. Her interests are in different disciplines such as food fortification, micronutrient supply, nutrition, food safety, plant-based alternatives, and yeah, I think many more. So thanks a lot for coming, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for the nice introduction. I think you missed two of my main interests, and this is cats and board games, and you may see one of my two cats at some point in the background because they love attention. And yeah, I'm very honored to be here and that I was asked to present a talk on healthy vegan diet. And as you may see during my presentation, it's not as straightforward as some of you may think. So I will just dive right in. Please feel free to interrupt me if something is not clear, or otherwise the presentation will be rather short, so we can have more time for discussion later on, and I will also share my contact information. So about myself, who am I? As Sarah already mentioned, I'm a pharmacist by training, and then did my PhD in nutrition and food science with a kind of specialization on food fortification and more precisely iron fortification of rice, which was very interesting work. And currently I'm a research advisor with USAID Advancing Nutrition, which is an implementing partner for the US government. And we are basically implementing nutrition programs and projects in low and middle income countries. I am also working as a consultant for the International Atomic Energy Agency, where I support them in studies with using stable isotopes to quantify iron absorption from different food products. And I'm also a consultant for some multi-protein startups. And all this work I am doing for my main motivation, and this is to basically contribute to the Sustainable Development Goals, the 4 ones that are most relevant to the work that I'm doing. You can see here with number 2, zero hunger being my main focus. And this presentation or this topic is very timely. April was not only the month of the World Health Day, but also International Mother Earth Day, which was last week. So now I told you who I am, and I would also like to know who you are. And I'm not sure if everyone will be able to participate in this, but I've created a Menti poll and would like to give you just like 30 seconds or so to answer. There are 2 questions in this Menti poll about vegan diets. So if you would like to participate, please either use the QR code or follow the link, or go to menti.com and enter the code. And I see that some of you have already responded. This is great. And I'll give it a few more seconds. All right, and I hope that many of you are able to see the responses. If not, the responses are to the question, which dietary pattern do you usually follow? So 10 of us are vegan, 8 consider themselves omnivores, 2 vegetarians that don't eat eggs or dairy, and 16 vegetarian that eat eggs and or dairy. And I see that the numbers have changed slightly, but about half of those who participated are vegetarian who eat eggs and or dairy, and about a quarter are vegan. And then for the next question, what is the most compelling reason to follow a vegan diet? I am just waiting for a few more seconds to get the answers in. But I can already tell you, most of the answers are environment as well as animal rights. So yes, I think now it's come to a standstill. So 27 participants said that the most compelling reasons would be the environment, 9 animal rights, and 1 taste preference. And this just gives us, you know, a little idea of what is the motivation behind following a vegan diet. And I will go to the next slide. So yes, as I mentioned, I was tasked to talk about a healthy vegan diet, and this was not so easy because as I was doing my research for this, it turned out that there are more questions than there are answers. But I would like to start with maybe the easier question: what is a vegan diet? And there are different definitions. One definition that I came across is that a plant-based diet consists of all minimally produced fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, nuts, seed, herbs, spices, and basically excludes all animal and dairy products. I am not super happy with this definition because I know that there are many vegan products that are not minimally processed, but highly processed. So for me, this definition did not quite make the cut. Another definition that I find more appropriate is that vegan excludes all animal products, especially meat, seafood, poultry, eggs, and dairy products, but it does not require consumption of whole foods or restriction of fat or refined sugar intake. And then there are a few different types of vegetarians you may already be aware, but just as a recap, so there are lacto-vegetarians who include dairy products, ovo-vegetarians who include eggs, or lacto-ovo-vegetarians that include eggs and dairy products. And I see that someone asked a question about what minimally processed food means. Minimally processed means that the food is still somewhat intact. So I don't have a kind of dictionary definition for it, but for example, a highly processed food would be something that's extruded, like extruded chips, for example, whereas a minimally processed food could be rice where you remove the hull and the bran to actually make it edible. So, you know, food processing often has a bad reputation, but food processing is also the reason why we can eat certain foods which otherwise would not be digestible. And then a few other subcategories that fit into this context are whole food, plant-based, low fat. Basically, this encourages to consume foods in their whole form and avoids meat consumption in large quantities. And then raw food, vegan, would mean vegan and the exclusion of all foods that are cooked at temperatures greater than 118 degrees Fahrenheit. And I really like this kind of depiction of the different types of diets because it's very easy. You can also see that vegan is completely on the plant-based diet, excludes all animal products. And then it gets less restrictive the further you go left. So this was easy, but the more difficult part is what is a healthy diet? And I would like to start at the top, which in my work and in the context that I work is often the WHO. So what does WHO say about healthy diets? Basically, it says that a healthy diet helps to protect against malnutrition in all its forms, as well as non-communicable diseases. So this would include diabetes, heart disease, stroke, cancer, etc. It also requires the energy intake to be in balance with the energy expenditure and the limitation of free sugars and salt intake. So the WHO is not the only institution that defines a healthy diet. In 2019, there was the Eat Lancet Planetary Health Diet that was released, and it shows you a plate where half the plate is basically fruits, vegetables, and nuts, and the other half consists of preferably whole grains, unsaturated plant oils, as well as modest amounts of meat and dairy. So it's supposed to be a global reference diet for adults and is also flexible and allows for adaptation to different dietary needs. They do mention also vegetarian and vegan diets and say that these are two healthy options within the Planet Health, but that they are personal choices. And one question that I always consider is very important is, who is all this for? So when we think about the Eat Lancet diet, this got a lot of attention globally because it was the first time that our researchers quantified this healthy diet in that form. But what was problematic about it was that the most affordable option of this Eat Lancet Planetary Health Diet costs about $2.80 a day. So that means that for about 1.6 billion people, this would exceed the household per capita income. And on average, this planetary health diet would be 1.6 times more expensive than the minimum cost of just nutrient adequacy. So nutrient adequacy would mean that you receive all the nutrients that you need, but it doesn't consider local customs, etc. And you can see on this graph that the price of this diet is very similar between high and low income countries, which it makes it clear that for those in low income countries, it won't be affordable to follow this diet, or at least less so than for high income populations. And one aspect to also consider is that some recommendations they just change over time. So what was considered to be best evidence 20 years ago may not be the case anymore. So many of you may know this pyramid. It's a food pyramid that was released from USDA between 1992 to 2005. And this basically depicts the reference diet, so what one person on average should eat per day. So it would have 6 to 11 servings of bread, cereal, rice, and pasta group, 3 to 5 servings in the vegetable groups, etc., with very sparing use of fats, oils, and sweets. From 2005 to 2011, the pyramid changed to a different pyramid, and you can see that the grains category shrunk a little bit, whereas vegetables and fruits would be more prominent. And currently, USDA has this My Plate, so it's not a pyramid anymore, but still the fruits and vegetables have a higher priority than grains, protein, and dairy. And here, this is just an overview to look at how this has changed over the years. Okay, so you see from what I've presented so far that it's not that straightforward. And oftentimes the problem is like, how do we get evidence? How do we synthesize it? How do we make it accessible for everyone? So USDA has the subgroup on dietary guidelines. It's the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee, and they have the protein subcommittee, and they are doing systematic literature reviews. And they have different review questions, and I picked 2 of them to just show you more or less how they go about this. So the first review questions, and you can look at the report if you look for it online, you can download it. The first systematic review question is, how do the health outcomes of a vegetarian diet compare to that of a diet which customarily includes animal products? And just to note, this means vegetarian, but also includes vegan diets, but they did not have a systematic review just on vegan diets. And the conclusion statement, and this is why it's not that straightforward, is that there's limited evidence that document that vegetarian diets protect against cancer. So in general, they did the systematic review, and what came out of it is that the evidence is limited. So we still don't know. It suggests that vegetarian, including vegan diets, are associated with lower body mass index and blood pressure. And it also indicates that vegan diets may increase the risk of osteoporotic fractures. The next review question that I picked out is, what is the relationship between the intake of animal protein products and cardiovascular disease? And this one is even less straightforward. If I had to read over the sentence a few times, it says that limited evidence from prospective cohort studies show inconsistent relationships between intake of animal protein products and cardiovascular disease, with somewhat more positive evidence for processed meats and coronary heart disease. So again, the evidence is limited. It's worded in a way that is not very straightforward, and definitely not targeting a general audience. However, there are other systematic reviews on this topic. I found one fairly recent one from the Cochrane database, and the review is about the vegan dietary pattern, and the prevention of primary and secondary cardiovascular diseases. And so what Cochrane reviews do is they kind of try to look for the highest quality evidence available and synthesize this. And it has very strict criteria and is a very elaborate process to work on a Cochrane review and to be even considered for inclusion in a Cochrane review. So this one has 13 randomized controlled trials, as well as 8 ongoing trials. And what they compared was a vegan dietary intervention versus no or minimal intervention for primary prevention of cardiovascular disease, vegan dietary intervention versus another dietary intervention for primary prevention, or secondary prevention. So none of these studies reported on clinical cardiovascular disease. And this review again concluded that there is insufficient information about the effects of vegan dietary interventions on cardiovascular diseases. So that shows you that there is quite a lack of evidence, and especially high quality evidence. So there are other types of systematic reviews that I came across while looking into this topic. One of them was also published recently, so last year, and that included 48 studies. These were not randomized control trials, but cohort and cross-sectional trials. And they found that vegan diets are lower in protein intake, that there was no significant difference in fat intake, and an association with low intake of certain vitamins and minerals, whereas other vitamins and minerals, including iron and some B vitamins, were not related with the vegan diet. And I don't know if you remember from a few slides ago where the conclusion was that the vegan diet may lead to osteoporotic fractures. In 2020, they published a secondary analysis of enhanced data that included about 10,000 participants, where they compared the differences in bone mineral density between adult vegetarians and non-vegetarians. And basically the bone mineral density was evaluated on 3 different parameters: femoral neck, total femoral, and total lumbar spine. And it showed that the bone mineral density values were significantly lower among vegetarians compared to non-vegetarians. However, those effects were attenuated upon adjustment for lifestyle factors, and they actually were statistically non-significant upon adjustment for anthropometric variables. So basically the vegetarians had a lower BMI, and when you controlled for that, then those results were not statistically significant anymore. And as I mentioned before, the study did not distinguish between vegetarian and vegan diets. So I think this is kind of what I could find for the general diet. However, I was also asked to look into veganism and workout. And again, I can tell you already that it's not that straightforward. So I found one study that compared a high protein plant-based diet with a protein matched omnivore diet. And this was to look into resistance training adaptation. And the study included 38 young men. Half were habitual vegans, half were omnivores. And they underwent a 12-week supervised resistance training program twice weekly. And their protein intake was matched. So it was adjusted to 1.6 grams per kilograms per day with a supplemental protein. And that protein was either soy or whey based. And they did a pre and post assessment. So they did an assessment at the beginning of the study and at the end of the study, and compared a few parameters that are relevant to resistance training. And the study found no between group differences. So their conclusion was that the high protein, exclusively plant-based diet was not different from a protein matched omnivorous diet in supporting muscle strength and mass accrual. They also concluded that the protein source did not affect the resistance training induced adaptation. So this kind of concludes that if you are consuming adequate amounts of protein, the protein source, if it's a high quality protein source, does not matter. And I also wanted to share this position paper by the German Nutrition Society. And they basically say that vegetarian diets are unproblematic for athletes, as long as it's a balanced diet with a variety of food and regular screening for critical nutrients provided. For vegan diets, it is currently not possible whether they increase the risk of nutrient deficiencies or whether there are any associated beneficial or detrimental effects on health and performance. They also mentioned that there are very few competitive vegan athletes. So again, it's just that there is not a lot of evidence, especially from scientific studies. But it should be assumed that vegan athletes will derive similar health benefits from sport and similar critical nutrients. So again, it's a very wonky statement and not a clear answer, or not as clear as one may hope. There is this kind of review. It's not a systematic review, it's just a narrative review on vegan diets that I found very interesting. I won't go into much detail about it now, but I would encourage you to look it up if you're interested in this topic. Basically, the author discusses the different macro and micronutrient challenges for vegan diets, including energy. Basically, energy is not a big issue in this respect because there are enough high quality sources and many energy supplements are vegan by themselves already. One issue that the author elaborates on quite a bit is on protein. So the issue is that plant-based protein sources are often incomplete and are missing important essential amino acids, such as lysine, and that they contain less branched-chain amino acids. So the digestibility of the plant-based protein is markedly less than that of animal products. However, soy protein appears to be comparable to whey protein isolate. So in some communities, soy has a bad reputation. However, I'm not sure if this is always based on most recent scientific evidence, and it seems to be, in terms of protein quality, a pretty good choice compared to animal-based products. Carbohydrates, I mentioned with energy already. There are good quality carbohydrate sources that are not animal-based. For fat, there are some issues to provide sufficient omega-3 amino acids. However, there are certain nuts and seeds that contain those acids, and there are also synthetic compounds that can be used for supplementation. In terms of micronutrients, vitamin B12 is an issue, so that should definitely be supplemented, and also other nutrients in case of deficiencies, such as, for example, zinc and iron. And so for kind of the last part of this talk about healthy vegan diet, I think especially with this sustainability group, is the question, what is healthy for the planet? And there has been quite a bit of research in the last few years, and there are some models that estimate the environmental impacts of different diets. For example, this systematic review that I'm showing here that compared vegan, vegetarian, and omnivorous diets, had 16 studies and 18 reviews, mostly carried out in the US and Europe, and concluded that the vegan diet is beneficial for the environment with regards to greenhouse gas emissions, land use, as well as water footprint. And one issue that I wanted to bring up is that meat substitutes carry very different environmental implications, and it's oftentimes difficult to understand what these implications are. So depending on the substitute, the meat substitute can have no positive impact or very little positive impact on the environment. And the issue again is the lack of data. So I just wanted to kind of show two of the headlines, and if you look around a bit, you will find many, many more. Last year and 2 years ago, there was one in Forbes and one in the New York Times, where they basically said that not all meatless meats are good for your health or the environment. And the issue is that there are no data, and that many, for example, the Impossible Burger, they have patented compositions, and it's not fully disclosed where some of the ingredients come from, how they are produced, etc. So therefore, it is difficult to understand what their environmental impacts are. So the Good Food Institute, that very much promotes plant-based diets, says that even after accounting for the processing required to turn plants into plant-based meats, every study to date finds that replacing conventional meat with plant-based meat substantially reduces every environmental impact measured. And this is great, and the Good Food Institute does a lot of good work. However, if you look at the references, and I hope those of you who are not joining online can also read this. So for this last statement, 2 of the 3 references are from companies that produce those alternatives. One is from Impossible Foods, one is from Morningstar Farms, both of which are very popular in the United States. And one is a publication from a university, and I was not able to find a funding source, if there is any, for this research. But I did try to look at this Impossible Foods report, but unfortunately it was not available. So again, it's not that straightforward. The evidence is very limited, and hopefully this will become more and more available. As you know, those diets definitely get more interest. Hopefully the science will pick up as well. there are a few other publications in this area. Here you can see the different greenhouse gas emissions that were estimated from different sources. You can see on the right side of the graph, the red bar is animal products, which has the highest numbers of greenhouse gas emissions, cropland use, etc. So the environmental footprint is the biggest for those types of products. Also, staple crops are pretty high up there, but they're not as high as those for animal products. Another study done by some of the same researchers assessed the health and environmental consequences of changing diets. So they basically had 4 diets. One was the reference diet scenario based on projections from the Food and Agriculture Organization. One was a healthy global diet, where it was assumed that global dietary guidelines on healthy eating were followed and that people would just consume enough calories to maintain a healthy body weight. So there would be no overeating. And then vegetarian as well as vegan diets. And they tried to calculate the economic value of following such diets. And this is always compared to the reference scenario. And basically what they found was that the economic value of changing to a vegetarian or vegan diets was very high. And this was also true for healthcare benefits as well as a value of life benefits. And here you can see that the avoided deaths that could come with such a change of diets. This is always in reference to the year 2050. So basically what the authors say is that if populations would change from the current diet to vegan, vegetarian, or healthy global diets, there would be both deaths avoided, several million deaths avoided, but there would also be a change in greenhouse gas emissions. And just to note, these are all models, so they are calculations that have different assumptions. The authors state also that those diets that they established are not, in that sense, realistic diets. They're just for the model's sake, but it kind of gives an idea of what the implications would be for changing certain dietary patterns. So this brings us to the end, and I guess like the rest of the talk, the conclusions are that there's just not a lot of evidence, and the high quality evidence is very scarce, and that we do need more evidence to better understand the health consequences of different diets. In order to maintain a healthy lifestyle, especially when you follow a vegan diet, the nutrient status for certain nutrients should be monitored closely to avoid deficiencies. And from an environmental perspective, it seems that vegetarian or vegan diets are beneficial compared to omnivorous diets. But the environmental footprint of some meat or dairy alternatives is not entirely clear. So this brings us to the end of my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions. And please reach out to me if you have any input, any questions, or if I'm also happy to share some non-scientific resources for vegan diets, including one course if you're interested on alternative proteins to milk and dairy. That's a free online course that is provided by Cambridge University. So I think I'll hand it over to Sarah to see if there are any questions. And thanks everyone for your attention.
So thanks a lot. I will stop the recording.